Short history, my dear friends, is not just a collection of dates and battles. It's a living, breathing entity. Every whisper, every clash of swords, every lost cry in the wind, all of it echoes through the corridors of time. And today, we find ourselves standing on the edge of one of those great echoes, an echo that nearly consumed Europe whole. Imagine, if you will, Kisava Europe in the early 13th century. The lands stretch endlessly, green fields under the open sky. The people, they go about their lives, unaware of what is stirring beyond the horizon. Knights polish their armor, lords quarrel over land, peasants till the soil under the watchful gaze of towering castles. But there's a calmness, a fragile peace, like the stillness before a great storm. Europe thought it knew war. It had seen battles between kings, rivalries between empires, but nothing in its long history had prepared it for what was coming. From beyond the distant steppes of Asia, from lands unknown and unimaginable, a shadow was growing. An unstoppable force, a tempest that had already swept across half the world, leaving nothing but ruin in its wake. And at its heartland stood a name that would send chills down the spines of even the bravest warriors: the Mongols. Now let me take you to the vast, endless plains of Mongolia. You can almost feel it, can't you? The wind whipping through the tall grass, the distant thunder of hooves as horsemen race across the land. The Mongols were not a people bound by walls or castles. No, they lived in the saddle, born into a world of fierce independence and brutal survival. And their leader, Genghis Khan, Genghis Khan was a man like no other. He was fire and fury. His people worshipped him as if he were God, and his enemies, well, they learned to fear his very name. By the time we reached the year 1241, the Mongols had already carved a path of devastation across the east. They had crushed the mighty empires of China, Persia, and the Islamic caliphates. City after city fell beneath the thunder of their hooves, their walls reduced to ash. But Europe remained blissfully unaware of the terror that was inching closer with each passing day. You see, the Mongols were not just conquerors. They were master tacticians, a force so precise, so terrifyingly efficient, that it seemed as though they could outthink their enemies before the battle had even begun. And now, with Genghis Khan's grandson, Batu Khan, leading the charge, and the brilliant General Subutai by his side, they set their sights on the rich, fertile lands of Europe. Their journey began in the east, where they swept through the Russian principalities as if they were nothing more than paper in the wind. Cities like Kiev and Ryazan were obliterated, their people either slaughtered or enslaved. But the Mongols, they were not content with just Russia. No. Their hunger was endless. And so, with their armies hardened by years of relentless conquest, they turned west. They turned toward Europe. Imagine, if you can, the fear that began to ripple across the land. It started as mere whispers, rumors. The Mongols are coming. At first, few believed it. How could a people from so far away, so foreign, so alien, ever pose a threat to the mighty kingdoms of Christendom? But then all news arrived. News of a great army, an unstoppable force moving with the speed of lightning, devouring everything in its path. Poland, Hungary, the Holy Roman Empire, they stood directly in the Mongols' path. And yet, Europe remained divided. Each kingdom more concerned with its own borders, its own battles, blind to the storm that was fast approaching. The Mongols, they were not like any enemy Europe had faced before. They did not come to negotiate or to parley. No, they came to destroy. They came with an army so disciplined, so ruthless, that their advance felt like the hand of death itself. Europe, so used to the chivalric wars of knights and honor, could scarcely comprehend the savagery that was coming for them. Since April of that year, and the Mongols made their first move, the Battle of Legnica in Poland. Now the Polish forces, bolstered by knights from across Europe, stood ready to face this invader. They were brave, yes, brave, but terribly naive. They had no idea what was coming for them. You see, the Mongols didn't just fight with brute force, they fought with their minds. They used deception, trickery, and fear. At Legnica, they employed one of their favorite tactics, the feigned retreat. The European knights thought they had the upper hand, thought they were driving the Mongols back, but little did they know they were being lured into a trap. And when the Mongols finally struck, it was with such devastating force that the Polish army simply disintegrated. Legnica was a slaughter. The Mongols did not stop to take prisoners, they did not offer mercy. By the end of the battle, the field was strewn with the bodies of knights and peasants alike. The flower of Polish nobility was cut down in a single day. And yes, this was just the beginning. For as Poland lay in ruins, the Mongols turned their gaze southward to Hungary. Hungary, a kingdom that had once stood proud, now faced with the full might of the Mongol horde. King Bela IV, desperate to protect his realm, called upon every able-bodied man in his kingdom, nobles, soldiers, peasants, anyone who could hold a weapon. They gathered at the plains of Mohi, hoping, praying, that they could stop the invincible tide. For the Mongols, they were already 10 steps ahead. Under the cover of darkness, they crossed the river Sajo and surrounded the Hungarian forces. When dawn broke, the Hungarians found themselves trapped, outmaneuvered, outnumbered, and utterly helpless. And so the Battle of Mohi began. It was chaos. The Hungarian army, caught off guard, could do nothing but watch as the Mongols descended upon them with a fury unlike anything they had ever seen. Arrows rained down like a storm, cutting through armor, flesh, and bone. The Mongols struck from all sides, their cavalry sweeping across the battlefield with terrifying precision. By the end of the day, Hungary lay in ruins, its army decimated, its people fleeing in terror. Europe was open. There was nothing standing between the Mongols and the heart of the continent. Oh, my friends, can you feel it, the weight of inevitability? The sense that history in that moment could have turned in an entirely different direction? Europe, as we know it, stood on the very brink of destruction. And yet, just when it seemed that all was lost, something extraordinary happened. History. It can turn on the smallest of hinges, and just as Europe seemed to stand on the edge of oblivion, a twist of fate, a whisper on the wind, would change everything. The Mongols, who had seemed unstoppable, who had shattered every army that dared stand before them, were poised for one final, devastating blow. Hungary had fallen. Poland was crushed. The path to the heart of Europe lay wide open, its cities trembling in fear, its kings cowering behind their walls, uncertain of what tomorrow might bring. It seemed inevitable that all of Europe would be swallowed by the might of the Mongol horde. But then something unexpected happened. Word arrived. It was from the Far East. The great Khan, Ogedei, the supreme ruler of the Mongol Empire, had died. And with his death came a moment of unimaginable consequence. You see, within the Mongol Empire there was a strict law. When the great Khan died, all the Mongol leaders, no matter where they were, no matter what conquests they had begun, had to return to Mongolia. The election of a new Khan took precedence over all else. Batu Khan, the leader of the European campaign, and Subutai, the brilliant general, received the summons. And despite their thirst for conquest, despite the fact that Europe lay at their feet, they obeyed. Can you imagine? An army so close to victory, so close to reshaping the very map of the world, suddenly turning back. The thunderous hooves that had crushed kingdoms silenced. The arrows that had darkened the skies put away. The cities that awaited their doom spared. Oh, my dear friends, it was as if the hand of fate itself had intervened. Europe had not saved itself. No heroic battle, no grand strategy had turned the tide. No. It was the death of one man, half a world away, that saved an entire continent. What a delicate thing, the thread of history. So fragile, so easily broken. The Mongols withdrew, and Europe was left to lick its wounds, to rebuild what had been destroyed, and to ponder the near miss of total destruction. Kings and emperors who had once been at each other's throats now found themselves united by a shared sense of relief. They had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had blinked. But let us not be fooled into thinking that the Mongol threat was forgotten. No, the scars remained. The fear lingered. The memory of those terrible, swift riders, those warriors who seemed to come from the very edge of the world, stayed with Europe for centuries. They had come closer to conquering the continent than any force before or since. And yet, they left as quickly as they had arrived, leaving behind only devastation and questions. What if? What if Ogedi Khan had lived just a little longer? What if Batu Khan and Subutai had continued their campaign? Would we even recognize Europe today? Would its great cities, Paris, Vienna, Rome, have fallen, their cathedrals and castles burned to the ground? Would the Mongols have established their rule over these lands, changing the course of Western civilization forever? For it is a question that haunts the corridors of time, a question that perhaps has no answer. But one thing is certain: Europe, though spared, would never be the same. The Mongols had left their mark, not through conquest, but through fear, through the memory of what could have been. Now, my friends, let us take a moment to reflect. What does this tale teach us? Is it a lesson in fate, in the whims of destiny, that can change the course of history in a single breath? Or is it a reminder of how fragile our world truly is? How even the greatest empires, the most powerful armies, can fall prey to the unpredictable forces of life and death. We like to think that history is something we control, that our choices, our battles, our decisions shape the world around us. And yet, there are times, like in the year 1241, when history itself is swept up by forces far beyond our understanding. And listen, can you hear it? The echo of the Mongol hooves, the distant thunder that once filled the air, it fades now, as all echoes do, into the mists of time. But we must never forget it, for in that fading sound is a story of what almost was, a story that, had things gone just a little differently, would have changed the world forever. And so, dear listeners, I leave you with this. History is not a straight line. It is a winding river, twisting, turning, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent, but always flowing, always carrying with it the weight of those who came before. And in those moments where the river seems ready to flood its banks, we must remember the smallest stone, the tiniest shift, can change everything. Thank you for joining me on this journey, on this deep dive into one of the forgotten chapters of our past. Keep asking questions. Keep seeking the stories that have been lost to time. For in those stories, we find not just the past, but ourselves. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant, and always, always listen to the echoes of the past.